A pathocracy is a government in which a small minority of psychopathic people, those people without consciences, empathy, when they take control over a society of normal people, deceptive messaging, racism, hatred of immigrants, all of these things that I think we're starting to get familiar with were on display at the CPAC conference. And who better to talk to about that than our guest today, John Nichols, author of many, many books, including the recent The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party. And as I understand it, a big fan of Thomas Paine. John,
I'm a very big fan of Thomas Paine. Yes.
What would Thomas Paine say about the CPAC conference that we just saw?
Oh, I think he'd probably write a pamphlet about it, and it wouldn't be a positive one. I'll be quite blunt. I think Paine would have a lot to say about it, as would anyone who understood the basic premises of the American Revolution. The founders of the American experiment were very imperfect. They made a lot of mistakes, but the one thing they were really good on was not wanting a king. And if you looked at CPAC over the weekend, I think what you saw was a sort of celebration of political monarchy unrivaled since we got rid of King George III.
There seemed to be, just a lot of dog whistling as well. The shape of the stage was compared to a Nazi symbol. What other kind of things did we hear?
Well, I mean, I think what you heard that was most unsettling was the constant sort of bowing down to Donald Trump by others. It wasn't so much what Trump said. I mean, Trump was predictable. And I was doing a BBC interview about his speech, and they asked me, well, how would you characterize the speech? And I said, long. It was a very long speech. And in typical Trump fashion, it was sort of his greatest hits, right? He's great. Everything he did was perfect. Biden's awful. It's just updated that now Biden's really awful. And then within it, the subtlety of calling out Republicans who haven't stood 100% with him, which was, pretty unsettling. It's like if you broke with Trump in any way, you're going to be named from the stage in front of the crowd, booed and targeted politically going forward for primary challenges or whatever else.
Is there any organization happening to push back from Republicans who are not Trumpists?
Yeah, there is. Adam Kinzinger, the congressman from Western Illinois, has started a group which he suggests will be some sort of PAC or whatever pushing back. And, there's others. I mean, you have the Lincoln Project types, although they seem to be in kind of crisis at the moment. But at the end of the day, there'll be money and organization for those who disagree with Donald Trump. But I think, and this is sort of the point I was getting at there, that I'm not sure that matters, because the powerful figures in the party who gathered at CPAC, and these were major players, former presidential candidates, U.S. senators, leaders in Congress, they basically stepped up one after another and sang the praises of Donald Trump, talked about how great Donald Trump was in a very in an odd sort of combination of messages, combination of themes. At times, they seemed to genuinely agree with him. And I think there are some of these folks who are Trumpists. They, whether they started there or not, they're there now, and that's who they are. But then also sort of this pathetic, tragic fear. And their voices were almost, they were almost quivering. They're like, I hope I say this right so that I won't be named as one of the people Donald Trump sees as unacceptable. And so that is again, the sort of model of a very harsh monarchy or a very harsh totalitarian state. And I think that's what Thomas Paine would see. I think that's what any reasonable American, in fact, many Republicans throughout history would see. CPAC was a very, very troubling and also very weird gathering.
Let's talk weirdness in addition to the troubling.
Well, they had a golden calf.
Yeah,
You
what's
know,
up with that?
that was something. And you know what? So first off, they're wheeling it in, and you're thinking, well, maybe this is just some, Michael Moore parody or something, right? That
Right.
they're going to wheel in a gold-plated Donald Trump
Sacha Baron Cohen's going to jump out from behind it and do a
exactly,
thing.
or Julianna, right? Some great comedian or somebody who's got a great sense of humor about all this is going to mock them, right? and especially because it's like wearing shorts and stuff. It's like a weird outfit, the whole bit. But no. The CPAC is called into session. People start showing up, and when they take a break from their unmasked, unsocially distanced gathering, and they need a little, sort of fresh air, they head over for a picture with the golden calf, and so,
can you remind people what the story is of the golden calf and why this thing?
Well, it's idol worship. I don't have to go into great detail. It's idol worship, right?
Right.
There's many of the world's great religions.
You're not allowed to do that.
Well, it's kind of considered, depending on your religion, of course. But there are.
I don't know any religions that are like, just worship the statue.
There's idolatry has gotten a bad name in a lot of contemporary religion, and yet there you had it, and I think that's the weird part about it, right? That some people seem to need to idolize a political figure, or even, I guess, a statue, gold-plated statue, and rather than to think for themselves, rather than to imagine.
Well, I think we have religion to thank for that. I mean,
you may be able to blame religion, but
decades, hundreds of years of religions telling you, no, this guy is the one intermediary between you and, all that is holy above.
Yeah. Although, in fairness to the Nazarene, I do believe one of the messages, in my Father's house there are many mansions, was a suggestion that, in fact, you could have a great diversity of opinion. And so, again, it's the earthly interpretations of this where we tend to get into a lot of trouble. And that is true, I think, in religion. It is also true in politics. The two things you're not supposed to discuss at the table, which are, of course, two of the most interesting things you can possibly discuss.
That's why small gatherings are so boring, because you're not allowed to talk about anything lest someone.
Well, I think increasingly we have been able to talk about things, but we tend to talk with people who agree with us, and
or who pretend to agree with you until they leave.
Well, they talk about you behind your back, and that's you're more of an East Coast person. I'm from the Midwest, where that's our official standard for mothers teach their children. Be nice to the face, but talk about them behind their back. And so it is cultural, but I will tell you that in Florida over the weekend at CPAC, you had a gathering of people who didn't want to disagree with each other, at least not very much. And that is a big new development, Julianna, because historically CPAC was a genuine gathering of the right, the whole of the right. And so you had libertarians, you had kind of more hardcore social conservatives, you had economic conservatives, you had, your range from a Rand Paul, who's quite anti-war, to his credit on a number of things, to hyper-militarists, literally the military-industrial complex. So you did have debates, and you had panel discussions where people would yell at each other and disagree. Now it has become kind of a parody of itself, and to an extent, what's fascinating is they were there criticizing cancel culture, right? They don't like it if you're criticized for saying certain things, and yet their whole event was sort of the embodiment of a conservative cancel culture, because they had quite clearly canceled out a tremendous number of the dissident voices, or not even dissident, a tremendous number of the voices that were traditionally thought of as part of a CPAC event, part of American conservatism. They've made conservatism much more narrow, and they have redefined it as something that I don't think William F. Buckley or Ronald Reagan would recognize.
Mm, mm. Well, I wonder, it certainly suggests that everything that people were saying about how Trump isn't just going to disappear and he's going to try to run again and he is going to be the leader of the Republican Party, that is the direction in which, the opposition to all that is good and kind is going.
I don't see how you can debate it. The president, former president, uh, basically made that the central theme of his speech, that he's not leaving the Republican Party. That actually made news, and it's important to note. There had been talk about a possible third party. He made it very clear he's comfortable owning this party, and so that was step one. But step two was throughout the speech there were references to the 2024 campaign, and at times he seemed to be begging the audience to start chanting, Trump 2024. He literally said, "Well, we'll be beating Biden," but I wonder who our candidate will be. Who? And it was like
He's like,
tragic.
yeah. Back to the comment that you made about
Yeah.
people wanting a leader. I think that's really interesting, especially given some recent history on 9/11. All of a sudden, everyone, and not everyone, but, look to Rudy Giuliani and look how well that turned out. This idea that in fearful times, people look to an authoritarian leader. We are in fearful times. I think we were in fearful times even before Trump stepped onto the scene. What are your thoughts about the fact that Trump's speech, in fact, CPAC as a whole, really was fear-mongering and about fear? Fear the Dems, fear other Republicans, fear immigrants, fear everything. Your thoughts about that?
Well, that's been Trump from day one. Remember, he came down the elevator in 2015 at Trump Tower and started talking about immigrants. This has been sort of a core theme of his, and clearly what he is seeking to exploit, amplify, focus in on are racial divisions, divisions between native-born, immigrant, divisions along lines of class. I mean, he'll exploit pretty much any division he can exploit.
We have things to fear. Climate change. There are
COVID.
things to fear. COVID, exactly.
But they don't want to fear that, which is a weird thing. They deny the things that we actually should be fearing. And they choose to fear the things that we don't need to fear, right? You don't need to fear immigrants. You don't need to fear people who are different from you. In fact, that's what's great about America. That has been the great strength of this country throughout its history at its best. And they've sort of turned the thing on a corner. And you say, well, why do you do this? What would cause you to do this? What sort of damage do you have? Was it your mother wasn't nice to you as a child? What happened here? And the answer is pretty simple. It's not some complicated psychological theory. And with all due respect to people who try to psychoanalyze Trump, this is basic politics. You have a political party that is offering ideas at its core that are completely unappealing to the American people. They want to increase the burden on working people and decrease the burden on the rich. They literally want to redistribute the wealth upwards. No, that is not a popular political position. You'd get about 5, maybe 8% support from the actual monarchists for that view. So in order to popularize themselves, they try to create targets of fear. They try to create divisions that then can build out a quote unquote movement around that sort of damage, if you will. And I thought CPAC amplified it to an incredibly high level. And that the challenge in this circumstance is that this is not an appealing politics per se. It only works in the absence of an appealing politics. And so in a weird way, CPAC puts pressure on the Democrats. And what the Democrats have to do is deliver. They have to provide, policies, programs, initiatives that soothe the pain on the issues that you were talking about: climate change, COVID, racism, economic inequality. They have to address those issues in fundamental ways. but they also have to do it in a positive and hopeful way. They have to talk about a future that really can be attractive, because the only way that Trump and the conservatives, what they now call conservatism, survives politically, the only way that it gets even into a third of the vote, or something in the range of like a 40% vote, something like that, what Barry Goldwater got, in 64, is if Democrats aren't doing a lot, if they aren't filling the void. Because if the void is filled, fear and fear mongering can only get you so far. And so, in a sense, I saw CPAC as throwing down the gauntlet to the Democrats. This is clearly what your opposition is going to be. Don't doubt it. Don't be unrealistic. But then also recognize that you can fight against that. It's just you can't fight against it from the center. You can't fight against it from a place of caution. If you're going to fight against it, you have to actually have bold programs that are more exciting than fear.
John Nichols, author, writer for The Nation. That's who we're speaking with. Thank you for that.
It is always an immense pleasure to join you and to talk about all these things that are going on.